Interference with an emergency call. What is it? Can the case be dismissed? What does the prosecutor have to prove in court? Hi, I'm Jeff Hampton with the Hampton Law Firm. Today I want to talk to you about the crime of interference with an emergency call. And by the way, if you wait around to the end of this video, I'll also give you a free ebook, What to Do If You've Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. All right, let's jump into this. Listen, interference with an emergency call, the most common scenario, we're going to talk about what it is, but the most common scenario in which an individual is arrested for interference with an emergency call is usually when an argument takes place between individuals and during the heated exchange between two people, and many times it's a domestic violence situation. The individual takes the phone away from someone trying to call 911 or interferes, as it's called, interference with an emergency call, interferes with that person's ability to finish that call, to make that call for 911 or for help. In fact, the most common scenario that we find this arise in our law practice is when there is both an interference with an emergency call charge and some type of domestic assault allegation tied with it. It's common for the police to believe that some type of assault is taking place because, after all, there's an emergency, right? Or at least they're supposed to be. So when the police come out there, they're usually assuming that there had to have been some type of emergency separate from the call that was the basis for the call to begin with. And so many criminal defense lawyers make the mistake of treating both the assault domestic violence case and the interference with an emergency call as two separate charges, which, even though they are separate, I mean, think about this. I'm going to give you an example. What if you are charged with interference with an emergency call and domestic violence assault? If your criminal attorney tried to somehow work out a plea deal where your domestic violence assault was to be dismissed and you took deferred adjudication probation on the interference with an emergency call, here's where you have to have experienced attorneys working on your behalf. If you get one case dismissed, but the other case is on probation, you are forever barred from getting either one of them off your record under Texas law. It's important. This is an important lesson, no matter what else. If you don't get anything else out of what I say on this video, this is critical that you understand this. You must get both charges either dismissed or resolved in the same manner if you want to make sure that you're able to clear your criminal record. And that's where it's important to make sure you're working with an attorney that not only handles criminal cases, but handles a lot of expunctions and non-disclosures, helping people know the rules of how to get something off their record, okay? And this is something we see, that mistakes that are made all the time by other criminal defense attorneys. Now, what is required to prove the crime of interference with an emergency call? Under Texas Penal Code, section 42.062, an individual commits the crime of interference with an emergency phone call, a telephone call, if the individual knowingly prevents or interferes with another individual's ability to place an emergency telephone call or to request assistance in an emergency from a law enforcement agency, medical facility, or other agency or entity, the primary purpose of which is to provide for the safety of individuals, okay? Now, additionally, another way you can be charged with interference with an emergency call is if the individual recklessly, and here we're talking about recklessly, renders unusable a telephone that would otherwise be used by another individual to place an emergency telephone call or to request assistance in an emergency from a law enforcement agency, medical facility, or other agency or entity, the primary purpose of which is to provide for the safety of individuals. All right, there's a lot of legal words in there, but let's break some of this down. What does emergency mean under Texas law? Emergency means, under the Texas Penal Code, a condition or circumstance in which any individual is or is reasonably believed by the individual making a telephone call to be in fear of imminent assault, or in which property is or is reasonably believed by the individual making the telephone call to be in imminent danger or of damage or destruction. Now, here's my point, that is a very subjective definition. Okay, very opinionated. Determining whether or not there's an actual emergency is going to be based upon the opinion of the witnesses that were involved and the police officer gathering that information at the scene. Officers will often fail to request a written statement from many witnesses and fail to determine if a true emergency was present. It is critical that your criminal defense attorney investigate that particular element of the criminal offense, because just because a call was interrupted, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter if there wasn't an emergency. The emergency element must be proven, okay? Now, what is the range of punishment for interference with an emergency call? Under the Texas Penal Code, interference with an emergency telephone call is classified as a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in the county jail and up to a $4,000 fine. However, if you have been previously convicted for the crime of interference with an emergency call, you can now be charged with a state jail felony, that which is punishable by a minimum of 180 days up to 2 years in a state jail facility. Now, as you can see, listen, this is not just a ticket. This is a pretty serious deal. You can do jail time on it, and it's something that you need to make sure is handled properly, all right? Now, I'm going to go through just very quickly a couple of legal defenses just before we get out on this video. I want to identify a few of these because this is critical. If your criminal defense attorney doesn't put together a specific plan with a criminal defense to back up that plan, then you stand a much lower chance of being able to get your case dismissed. So let me talk to you for a few minutes about some of the proven strategies that we've used in the past. Number one is that an emergency was not taking place. If you remember, an emergency means a condition or circumstance in which any individual is or reasonably believed by the individual making a telephone call to be in fear of imminent assault or imminent danger of damage or destruction to property. Now, what if there was no fear of imminent assault? What if there was no fear of any type of damage of property? How does this happen? Let me explain how this happens. In the heat of the moment, when tensions are high and the alleged victim is upset, particularly in a domestic violence situation, people are emotional. Statements may be made that don't accurately reflect what took place. In this situation, it's critical that people step back and look at it and say, wait a minute, what really happened here? If that alleged victim can provide an affidavit articulating a clear-headed view of what actually took place as opposed to being guided by their emotions and their frustration at the time, then what can happen is there may be a reasonable doubt that can be established regarding the element of emergency as defined under the Texas Penal Code. Now, number two, what if you did not recklessly, let's talk about this defense, what if you did not recklessly damage or destroy the phone? Now, if that phone, remember there was two ways to be able to prove this. One is to interfere with the call. The other way is to damage or make the phone inoperative. Well, what if the phone was damaged or destroyed, but what if the prosecutor can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was done so recklessly? What if your actions were purely negligent and accidental? For example, what if you went to grab a file in the hand of the person, and in the process, you knocked down the phone was made inoperative. And maybe you were arguing with this person, and at the time they got upset because they thought you were grabbing for the phone, but you were actually grabbing for something else. And accidental or negligent conduct is not criminal under the statute, and the burden of proof always remains on the state of Texas in order to prove this criminal intent element of reckless, okay? And failure to meet that burden benefits you. You will end up with a not guilty verdict at trial. Now, here's another defense. What if you were not the cause of the damage to the phone? What if the phone was damaged, but it wasn't because of something that you did? What if you were in a heated argument with the alleged victim, and in the process of that heated discussion, the phone was dropped by the alleged victim themselves, and in the process of trying to open the phone and place a telephone call, they dropped it? What if it wasn't because of something that you did? Okay, now this is critical. You have to cause the damage, okay? You have to be the reason why, you or your loved one has to be the reason why the phone became inoperative or was interfered with in some way, all right? Now, finally, what if you had no knowledge that an actual emergency call was being placed? I mean, remember, the crime of interference with an emergency call requires the state of Texas to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you knowingly prevented or interfered with another individual's ability to place an emergency telephone call or to request assistance, okay? So you had to do so knowingly. If you had no idea that the individual was attempting to make an emergency telephone call, you now have the leverage to argue through your criminal defense attorney that you did not act knowingly under the Texas statute, okay? Now, one of the questions an aggressive and experienced criminal defense lawyer should ask in this situation is, how many witnesses were present? Who else was there to witness this? Was it just you and the alleged victim? Is there a third-party witness that could provide a sworn statement to help establish some of the legal defenses here that we're talking about are viable for your charge? Does the alleged victim now realize that maybe they overreacted to the situation with the emergency call, and now that they've thought through it, they want to make sure and provide some information in order to clear up what's going on? You see, by providing that type of evidence at the very beginning of your case, you put yourself in the best position of leverage to negotiate a possible dismissal. Now, listen, there's multiple ways to get an interference with an emergency phone call case dismissed. Sometimes we can get it dismissed for lack of evidence. Sometimes we can negotiate a conditional dismissal of your charges. You can sometimes, depending on your county, get into a diversion program that will allow you to get your case dismissed and eligible for expunction from your record. And finally, you always have the right to a jury trial to make the prosecutor prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. But those decisions tie in with who you choose to work with as your criminal defense attorney. And if you or a loved one are in need of a criminal defense attorney for the crime of interference with an emergency call, I want to invite you to give our office a call. If your case is out of the North Texas area, give us a call at the Hampton Law Firm. We'll be happy to answer all your questions, give you a free consultation. And I promised you, if you waited around to the end of the video, I'd give you a free ebook, What to Do If You Have Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. Click the link down here below and I'll be happy to send it right over to you. And listen, I know I've just been kind of going through this very quickly. There's a lot more here that you may have questions about, so don't hesitate to give us a call. And I want to thank you for watching our video. If you liked what you heard today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, and share it with others who may be in need of it. I look forward to seeing you on our next video series. Thanks.